There are truths in the Imperium so ancient and so vast that even speaking their names feels like trespass. Most citizens will live and die without ever glimpsing the edges of those truths, their lives folded neatly within faith, fear, and duty. But every lie the Imperium tells itself has a shadow, and some shadows stretch far deeper than the black between the stars. On the night that would be remembered only in Forbidden's archives, a ripple passed through the warp to faint to register, on augurs, to brief for astropaths to scream before silence took them. Something had moved beneath the Emperor's unmoving form, stirring through a buried memory older than the Great Crusade, older than the throne, older perhaps than mankind. And for the first time in 10,000 years, a question dared to rise. In the minds of those closest to Terra's heart, what if the Emperor's greatest secret was not his death, but his intention? What if the Golden Throne was not the end of his design, but the final veil protecting humanity from a truth it was never meant to carry, a truth the Emperor himself forbade, because no species, not even his own, could bear its weight without shattering? If you want to walk into that forbidden shadow, if you want to understand the Emperor in ways the Imperium would silence you for, then stay with this story. And if these explorations of the deepest, hidden parts of Warhammer 40K's lore speak to you, support this channel by liking the video, sharing it with those who walk the same dark paths, and subscribing so the signal can continue through the void. The summons reached Custodian Arceus Vallon in the hour before dawn, though dawn meant little in the shadow of the Imperial Palace, where light was a luxury and darkness an old companion. He had not slept. Custodians seldom did, and never easily. Even in the quiet hours, terror whispered beneath their boots, the murmur of a billion pilgrims, the shudder of ancient engines, the restless ache of a world built on bones. Arceus felt all of it as he knelt in the Hall of Vigilance, polishing the edge of his guardian spear with a ritual precision that steadied the thoughts he did not voice. When the vox chime sounded, he rose at once, certain that whatever required a custodian at this hour would not be trivial. The voice that crackled through restrained, hushed in a way custodians recognized as the sound of someone confronting a truth they did not want. Arceus Vallon, report to the inner descent. Alone, the inner descent had been sealed since the days when the palace still burned from traitor fire. No one went there, no one even asked why. That was reason enough to move quickly. He passed through sanctums of polished marble and prayer-worn stone, the air thick with incense that clung to his armor like ancient dust. Servitors bowed without looking up, priests whispered litanies as he passed, though their words faltered as if they sensed something stirring beneath their feet, something older than prayer. He ignored them. A custodian did not allow emotion to shape duty, yet uncoiled in Arceus's chest in a way he had not felt since the day Guilliman returned from the dark. As he approached the sealed gate of the inner descent, he found only one figure waiting for him. A thin girl, robed in the deep blue of the Adeptus Telepathica. An astropath far too young to be standing here. On this threshold, her eyes were milky, but they turned toward him with unmistakable clarity, as though sight were merely a courtesy, not a requirement. "I am Mara Salini," she said quietly. "The Emperor sent for you." Arceus studied her. "The Emperor has not spoken in 10,000 years." She did not look away. "He spoke to me." The words landed like a blade, laid gently against the throat, not cutting, but warning that the next movement might. Arceus could feel her mind, not probing his, but radiating pressure like a harp string pulled too tight. She had been touched by something that had no name in the lexicons of the Imperium, something that hummed beneath her words like a distant tremor. "What did he say?" Arceus asked. "That you must see the place he buried," she whispered. "Before it wakes." Cold air slipped through the seals as the gate groaned open. The passageway beyond descended, like the throat of a dying colossus, narrow at first, then widening into a cavernous chute lined with fractured aquilae and half-melted reliefs of the Emperor's early wars. The Emperor had walked these paths once. That knowledge alone made every step feel heavier. As they descended, the temperature dropped, and Archaeus felt the hairs rise beneath his armor. The stone here was wrung to smooth, to precise, as if carved not by tools, but by intention. Mara walked with steady, unhesitating steps, her thin hands clenched in the folds of her robe. She winced once, twice, as though hearing something distant and painful. "You should not be here," Archaeus said. "This place is forbidden." "That is why he sent me," she replied, "to go where no one else is allowed." "How did you receive his message?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, he sensed the shape of her fear. Not in words, a pulse, a memory not my own, something. Opening. Archaeus felt the rumble. Beneath his feet then a vibration so faint that most mortals would never feel it. But custodians were forged to sense the slightest tremor in the Emperor's domain. This was not the shudder of machinery or the hum of the throne's reactors. This was older, deeper, the kind of movement that happened in stone that had been holding its breath for millennia. Lights flickered along the descent, one by one illuminating. Walls inscribed with symbols Archaeus did not recognize. Not Imperial, not Mechanicus. Something older, smoother, as though the stone had learned to remember shapes, rather than be carved into them. When the passage opened into a wide chamber, Archaeus stopped in place. It was vast, larger than any cathedral he had ever seen, yet buried beneath thousands of tons of palace stone. Columns rose like petrified giants. The air tasted stale, metallic, as if it had never been meant for lungs. In the center of the chamber stood a structure the size of a titan's heart, smooth, seamless, faintly luminescent beneath layers of dust. It pulsed once as they approached, a weak echo of something waiting to wake. Mara inhaled sharply. "This is where he began the lie." Archaeus turned sharply. "Explain." She pressed her palm to the structure. Light rippled outward. He hid this so humanity would never know who he was before the throne. Before Archaeus could respond, the chamber shuddered again with the tremor of awakening machinery, but with the unmistakable sensation of a presence stirring, like a sleeper shifting beneath an old, heavy dream. He took a step forward, spear raised. Mara whispered, "It remembers him." The ground beneath them thrummed like the first beat of a newborn heart. Then the structure opened, and everything humanity believed about the Emperor began to crack. The seam appeared without sound, no grinding, no cracking, no hiss of pressure releasing. It simply parted, as if the structure had been waiting for this exact moment to draw its first breath in 10,000 years. Dust slid from its surface in thin veils, faint light bled from inside, neither warm nor cold, but something that felt like memory made visible. Archaeus stepped in front of Mara, guardian spear lowered in a stance no custodian had taken in the Emperor's presence for millennia. Whatever this thing was, whatever it held, had been hidden under more secrecy than the early vaults of the Primarch project, and now it was waking. At first the interior looked empty, a hollow chamber shaped like a seed split open. The light pulsed again, and the hollowness changed, resolving into subtle reliefs along the inner curve. Not inscriptions, not scripture, images, faint impressions etched into the material, emerging only as the structure responded to their presence. Archaeus saw shapes that resembled human forms, but elongated, half-shrouded, blurred as though remembered imperfectly by something that had outlived its own recollection. Mara stepped closer, her breath trembling. "Their memories," she whispered, "not carved, imprinted. By whom?" Archaeus asked. She shook her head. "Not by hands, by thought, by witness." As the light pulsed again, the relief sharpened. Archaeus recognized none of the figures, but one, standing at the center of a tableau, drew his eye with a force that felt like gravity. A tall silhouette draped in a cloak of indistinct lines, head crowned not with metal, but with a halo of radiance that seemed to ripple across the surface in waves of meaning too complex for language. Mara raised her hand toward it, fingers hovering an inch above the surface. "That is him," she breathed. Before terror, before the palace, before the throne, Archaeus stared. "That is not possible." She turned her blind eyes toward him. Is anything of him truly impossible? Before he could answer, the chamber's light surged, filling the hollow with brilliance that forced him to shield Mara with his body. The glow was not illumination, it was sensation, a pressure against the mind, a whisper without words, the echo of something ancient stretching the boundaries of its confinement. Arceus gritted his teeth. Mara stepped back, but she stood unmoving, the light washing over her face like waves of cold dawn. She wasn't resisting it. She was listening. Then she gasped and staggered as if struck by a physical blow. Arceus caught her, lowering her gently against a stone. Her pulse raced beneath his gauntlet. Her breathing came in sharp bursts. What did it show you? He demanded. Her eyes fluttered. Not show, remembered. It remembers him. It remembers what he ran from. The words cut deeper than he expected. Custodians knew the Emperor as absolute, the unmoving fulcrum around which mankind's fate turned. The idea that he had ever run from anything felt blasphemous, a fracture in the foundation of belief itself. What did he run from? Arceus asked. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Himself. Before he could press her, the structure rippled, and the images pulsed with renewed clarity. Scenes unfolded like ghosts trapped in crystalline amber. A figure resembling the Emperor, but younger, less defined, face shifting like someone seen through rippling water, stood upon a landscape not of terror, but of something older, primordial, where the sky itself bent in strange arcs. Shadows gathered at the edges of that vision, shapes with no bodies, ideas with no form. They circled him, not as predators, but as if drawn to his presence by some undeniable law. Mara shivered violently. These are not demons. Arceus frowned. What are they? They're possibilities, she said. Thoughts made flesh. Futures that never were. Futures he refused. The chamber hummed, vibrating the air until dust lifted in thin spirals. The images swelled, the radiance intensifying until it throbbed in sync with Mara's breathing. She reached up weakly, fingers trembling as she pointed toward the central silhouette. He wasn't escaping enemies, she said. He was escaping what he could become. The floor beneath them rumbled again, deeper this time. The entire structure seemed to inhale, drawing energy from the chamber, from the stone, from the very presence of the two who dared witness it. Arceus lifted Mara in his arms, instinct overriding curiosity. We are leaving, he said, but as he turned toward the passage, the structure sealed itself behind a veil of shimmering force, closing the only exit. No alarm, no lock, just a quiet refusal. Mara clutched his armor. It's not trying to trap us, it's trying to finish the memory. The relief shifted once more, forming a final image clear, complete, unmistakable. The silhouette of the Emperor stood in a vast expanse of shimmering void, surrounded by the shadow possibilities, but instead of fleeing, he was dividing himself, splitting light from light, identity from identity, carving something vast and terrible from his own being. Arceus stared, stunned into silence. What is he doing? He whispered. Mara's voice cracked. He's creating the lie that saved humanity. The chamber dimmed. The light receded. The exit unsealed with a soft sigh. Arceus carried her toward the passageway as the structure's last pulse faded like a dying heartbeat. Behind them, the ancient memory closed, and the throne far above trembled ever so slightly, as though the Emperor himself had felt something stir. The climb back toward the living heart of the palace felt longer than the descent. Arceus moved in measured strides, Mara's slight weight barely noticed by his gene-forged strength, but the thought of what they had seen pressed against his mind like a too-tight helm. Above them, buried under kilometers of stone and ceremony, the Emperor sat unmoving on the golden throne. Below, in that forgotten chamber, the ghost of something older than the Imperium had opened its eyes, and somewhere between those 2 points, Arceus felt himself thinning, stretched between the certainty he had been forged to embody, and the doubt now whispering. In the cracks of his faith, Mara stirred in his arms as they passed through the last of the sealed gates. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow, but her eyes opened with a clarity that belied her exhaustion. "You're walking too loud," she murmured. Custodians did not laugh, but something like it tugged at the edges of Arceus's mouth. "Stone does not complain," he said. "And if anyone in this palace is allowed to walk loudly, it is one of us." "No," she said, eyes turning toward the unseen ceiling. "Not here. Not now. He's listening." Arceus did not ask who she meant. There was only one being in this place whose attention could make a custodian feel like a child caught trespassing. He set her down gently when they reached a junction, heading toward the inner archives, a place where knowledge was hardened like weapons and guarded just as fiercely. "Can you stand?" She wobbled, then nodded. "I'll stand as long as he needs me to." "Do not mistake exhaustion for devotion," he said. "Even since fall, is they walk too far on broken bones." She gave him a strange look, part respect, part pity. "You keep speaking as if you know where the ground is," she whispered. "I don't think any of us do anymore." They entered the archive through a door of blank adamantium, unadorned by sigil or icon, that alone marked it as important in a palace where every surface screamed sanctity. Inside, the air was cold and dry, saturated with the smell of old data slate casings and preserved parchment. Cogitator banks rose like silent colossi, their machine spirits sleeping behind hex-warded plates. Only a handful of robed archivists moved between them, their faces half hidden, their eyes growing wide when they saw Arceus. He spoke before they could react. "We require access to sealed node Thricenol. Custodian authority, Thronewood." They hesitated for only a heartbeat before bowing and scrambling to comply. Even here, in this temple of knowledge, custodian authority was second only to the Emperor's will. Yet Arceus felt the weight of what he had just invoked. Thricenol was a designation that appeared only in the oldest procedural dogma category, for data so dangerous that its primary defense was forgetting it existed at all. Mara touched the nearest cogitator casing, her fingers resting lightly on the rune-etched metal. "It's already awake," she said softly. Arceus frowned. "What is?" "The memory we disturbed," she replied. "The chamber was never meant to be alone. It had a twin, two halves of the same thought." The archivists returned with a small, fist-sized device, its surface blacker than void, drinking in the lumen light instead of reflecting it. No ornamentation, no seals, just a single, hair-thin line circling its center like the seam of a seed waiting to split. "This is all that remains of Node Thricenol," one archivist said, voice nearly breaking. "We were instructed never to activate it, only to keep it from being destroyed." "Who instructed you?" Arceus asked. The man swallowed. "The Custodes, 10,000 years ago." Arceus took the device in his hand. It was heavier than it looked, as if density and history had become the same thing. Moreau's breath hitched. "He wants you to see it," she whispered. Arceus did not ask how she knew. He turned the device over once, then placed it on a nearby plinth. With a practiced motion, he pressed his thumb into the seam. The surface rippled like disturbed water. Light seeped from within, forming a thin band that spread outward in a circle until it became a hovering ring of pale luminescence. The archivists fell to their knees. Mara did not. Her body went rigid, her blind eyes locking onto the ring. The light thickened, drawing inward, coalescing into a sphere that hung in the air above the plinth. Images flickered within its depths, too fast at first to pass, then slowing, stabilizing into a scene that made every breath in the room hold still. Arceus saw a world, not terror, not any world he recognized from campaign records. Its sky was the color of deep bruises, shot through with veins of raw warplate. Mountains hung in the air like broken teeth. Seas flowed upward in defiance of gravity, dissolving into clouds that bled back to earth in luminous rain. It was not a place designed for flesh. It was an idea of a world, half-formed and already haunted. At its center stood a figure. He was not yet the Emperor, as the Imperium depicted him. No armor, no regalia, no halo of golden flame. He wore simple robes, dark and unadorned, that moved in currents of a wind that did not exist. His face was both young and impossibly old, features shifting subtly, as if 1,000 iterations of humanity folded beneath his skin. But his eyes, those did not change. They were the same as the statues, the frescoes, the visions that still burned through the Adeptus Astronomica. Calm, terrible, kind, endless. Mara fell to her knees then, not from reverence, but from the pressure of recognition. Archaeus felt it too, a deep tug in the marrow of his bones. Every fiber of his being had been crafted to serve this presence. Even across 10 millennia, he walked here, Mara whispered. Before terror, before us, the memory shifted. Shadows gathered at the edge of the scene, coiling like smoke given purpose. They had no faces, no limbs, no eyes, but Archaeus felt them looking back through the vision with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. Possibilities, Mara had called them, futures refused, paths untaken, the Emperor still only a man, and yet so much more lifted his hand. The shadows flinched, drawn forward despite themselves. Light flowed from his palm, not the gold of the Astronomican, but something colorless and pure, like the very concept of definition made visible. Wherever it touched the shadows, they splintered into shards of unrealized form, becoming countless smaller echoes that scattered across the bruised sky. Mara clutched her chest. He wasn't just fighting them, she said. He was choosing. Choosing what? Archaeus asked, though he already feared the answer. Choosing which future would be allowed to exist, she whispered, and which ones he would kill before they were born. The scene zoomed closer, the sphere obeying a will not their own. The Emperor's gaze turned slowly, inexorably, until he seemed to be looking directly at Archaeus through the memory. For a heartbeat, the custodian forgot how to breathe, because in that gaze he saw something he had never seen in any painting, statue, or battle. Him. Regret. The light within the sphere flickered. The vision stuttered, and somewhere far above, the Golden Throne's machinery gave a single, warning groan. The warning groan from the Golden Throne did not echo through the archive as sound. It arrived as pressure, a descending weight that settled on skulls and spines, a tightening of the air as if the atmosphere itself felt fear. One of the archivists collapsed with a stifled cry. Hands clamped over his ears, though no noise assaulted them. Another began to mutter half-remembered catechisms, his voice shaking like a candle in a storm. The sphere of memory flickered violently, its images distorting into streaks of light and broken silhouettes, as though someone or something were trying to pull it back into silence. Archaeus stepped toward it, one hand raised, not in reverence but in defiance. Custodians were crafted to endure what would break lesser minds. He felt the shaping pressure inside his skull, the push of a will vast enough to fill the warp, unmistakable even diluted through 10 millennia of strain. The Emperor was aware, not of the archivists, not of Mara, not of the memory sphere, but of him. Archaeus felt the recognition of spear point touching the center of his thoughts. It was not hostile. It was not gentle. It was simply the attention of an entity operating on a scale where human categories held no meaning. His breath stilled, his pulse stuttered. And yet he did not look away. Mara, still kneeling, lifted her face. "Don't speak," she whispered. "Don't think loudly. He's looking through you." Archaeus swallowed, his throat dry as ash. "You said he reached for you before. This is different." Her fingers curled weakly. This is him noticing something he didn't mean to leave behind. The memory sphere stabilized abruptly, as if whatever force had threatened to extinguish it had paused. Within its depths, the Emperor's younger form remained frozen mid-motion, one hand extended toward the swirling shadows he had splintered. The landscape around him convulsed, mountains bending like molten wax, the sky cracking open to reveal fractures of raw warplate. This was no physical place. It was a battlefield of thought and potential, a realm where futures contested one another for the right to become real. Archaeus felt something shift, then not in the sphere, but in the archive itself. The walls grew colder, the lights dimmed, air thinned as if the room were being exhaled by some great unseen lung. Mara's blind eyes widened with sudden dread. "It's waking," she said. "Not the sphere, the other half." The half he buried deeper. Before Archaeus could respond, the memory surged again. The Emperor moved not with the casual inevitability that Imperial artwork portrayed, but with urgency, even desperation. His expression shifted in a way Arceus had never imagined possible. The slightest tremor around the mouth, an infinitesimal tightening near the eyes. It was the face of someone doing something they did not want to do, but saw no alternative to. "He's splitting something," Mara whispered. "I can feel it. He's carving himself apart." Arceus' heart hammered. "Explain." "He's separating a part of his own power, the part those things, those possibilities were drawn to. He's cutting it away so it can't become." The concept sickened Arceus more than any demon could. The idea that the Emperor, the master of mankind, had once feared what he could become, that he had amputated a portion of his own nature to prevent it from blooming into something monstrous, shattered more certainty in Arceus' mind than any enemy blade ever had. The shadows in the vision, now smaller and more frantic, swirled toward the severed light. It pulsed like a second sun being born. The Emperor raised his hand, shaping it, directing it, forcing it into form. The scene grew unstable, the sphere shaking violently as though depicting something it was not meant to show. Mara reached out, her voice cracking. "Stop it. He doesn't want us to see this." Arceus placed his hand on the sphere. The moment his armored fingers touched the surface, a shock wave of cold surged through him, snapping his mind into the scene. If gravity had reversed for a heartbeat, one impossible, blasphemous heartbeat, Arceus saw not the memory, but the Emperor's perception of that moment. The weight of it, the sorrow, the unbearable cost. He saw the shadows recoil from the severed portion of his power, not because it was weak, but because it was closer to what they were. The Emperor forced that fragment down into a cage of conceptual stone, sealing it beneath layers of identity, intention, and finally silence. A silence that had lasted millennia. A silence that was now cracking. Arceus tore his hand away. The sphere blazed with light, then collapsed inward with a soundless implosion, its substance condensing into a single point of luminescence before vanishing entirely. The archivists gasped, scrambling backward. Mara slumped against a cogitator, shaking violently. Above them, faint but unmistakable, came the resonant thrum of the Golden Throne's deepest mechanisms, shifting in ways no machine priest had ever been permitted to hear. Arceus steadied Mara. "What did we awaken?" She pressed her forehead to the cold stone. "Not a monster," she whispered. "Not a demon. Not a god." Her voice broke. A memory he never wanted to feel again. Arceus exhaled slowly, the reality settling like dust on a battlefield. "Then we report to the Captain General." At once, Mara shook her head. "No, you don't understand." She reached for his gauntlet, gripping it with surprising force. "The moment we speak this aloud, it becomes real. Spoken truth cannot be unmade. And he hid this for a reason." Arceus paused in the deep of the palace, somewhere between the throne and the forgotten chamber they had uncovered. The stone trembled again. A pulse, a breath, a reminder. Something long buried had stirred, and something behind the throne had answered. He tightened his grip on his spear. "Then we must learn the rest," he said quietly. "Before it wakes fully." He lifted Mara into his arms once more. This time, neither of them looked back. The hall of echoes lay beneath the outer sanctums of the Imperial Palace, a place where sound died too quickly and memory lingered too long. Arceus entered with Mara in his arms, her breath shallow, her skin cold as marble. No servants walked these halls, no priests chanted. Even the lumen strips seemed to dim in their presence, as if the stones themselves feared attention. Here, the custodies filed away knowledge that could not be destroyed, and could never be spoken, knowledge that existed in the narrow space between truth and sacrilege. Arceus had never imagined he would bring anything into this place, and certainly not a secret the Emperor had buried himself. The silence was suffocating. Mara stirred, fingers twitching as they brushed against the gold of his cuirass. "It's getting louder," she whispered. What is the memory? It doesn't want to sleep anymore. Arceus did not answer. He knew better than to soothe with lies. They moved deeper, the hall narrowing, until it formed a long corridor supported by rib-like arches of black stone. Custodian sentinels stood unmoving along its length, statues to most, but Arceus knew they breathed, thought, watched. Their armor gleamed with a dull sheen, their eyes tracking him as he passed, not out of suspicion, but out of recognition. He carried something none of them wished existed. At the corridor's end, a single door waited tall, unadorned, carved from a metal Arceus couldn't name. It did not open by rune or command. It opened because a custodian approached with purpose. The metal parted soundlessly. Inside, the chamber was stark and circular, walls lined with shelves that held nothing. The emptiness felt deliberate, almost reverent, as if absence itself was the relic preserved here. Only a single daze occupied. The center, etched with grooves that pulsed faintly at Arceus' approach. He set Mara gently upon the daze. Her breathing quickened, then steadied, as if the stone beneath her offered some grounding connection. "What is this place?" she asked. "A vault for truths too dangerous to be known," Arceus said. "Even by us." Mara's lips parted. "So we shouldn't be here." "No," Arceus said, lifting his spear. "But we are." The grooves on the daze brightened, responding to Mara's proximity. Lines of faint gold ran across the floor and up the walls, forming a slow-moving lattice that pulsed like a heartbeat. Arceus stiffened. He had never seen the vault activate, not even during the darkest hours of the heresy. Mara gasped softly. He used this chamber once, when, before he sat on the throne, the pulse grew stronger. Arceus clenched his jaw. "Mara, what is waking?" She trembled as the gold light washed over her eyes. Something he cut away. The piece of himself he feared more than the War Master, more than the warp, more than everything that ever crawled out of old night. Arceus felt his blood chill. "He sealed it here?" he asked. Mara shook her head slowly. "No, this chamber remembers the act, but it does not hold the fragment. That piece went somewhere he believed it would never be found. Somewhere beyond sight." Arceus steadied himself. "Then why is the vault activating now?" "Because it senses the fragment stirring again." The custodian felt the ground beneath his boots thrum, faint but undeniable. The same pulse they had felt in the memory sphere. The same pulse from the buried chamber. The same echo that had rattled the throne itself. The Emperor's severed memory, whatever it had been. Whatever it still was waking. Mara lifted her hand, as though feeling something ripple across the boundary between mind and matter. "He didn't cut away power," she whispered. "He cut away a truth." Arceus frowned. "What truth?" "That he was never alone inside himself." A crack spidered through the floor, not stone breaking, but light fracturing, rising like steam. The vault shuddered, its empty shelves trembling as echoes formed in the air. Faint impressions of symbols, patterns, silhouettes, flickering in and out of coherency. Not real, not hallucinations. Memory struggling to manifest shape. Mara's voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "I can hear it." "What does it say?" "That it remembers us," she murmured. "That it remembers humanity." Arceus stiffened. "How?" "It predates us. It remembers the idea of us," Mara corrected. "The Emperor carried that idea long before he carried flesh." Something deep and resonant hummed through the chamber, vibrating the air, vibrating bone. Arceus stepped closer, spear tightened in both hands. The gold lattice on the walls began to rotate slowly, like great celestial rings shifting in a pattern older than mortal language. Mara collapsed forward onto her hands. Arceus knelt beside her at once. "What is happening to you?" "It's speaking," she gasped. "Through memories, through the cracks he left behind." Arceus lifted her chin gently. "Then tell me what it says." Her breath shuddered. "It's telling me why he hid it." The vault shuddered again. "And why he's losing control of it." Arceus froze. "What do you mean losing control?" Mara swallowed, her voice barely more than breath. "Custodian. He cannot hold the fragment much longer. The golden throne was built to contain the warp. not to contain himself. The vault lights dimmed, then surged so violently that the walls looked ready to ignite. Mara clutched his arm. And when the fragment wakes fully, the Emperor will remember everything he cut away. The days beneath them cracked like ice under strain. And humanity, she whispered, tears streaking down her face, will no longer recognize the god it worships. The chamber exhaled if stone could breathe, and the pulse sounded again. Closer this time. Worse. Awakening. The pulse hit like a pressure wave. Not sound, not tremor, something deeper, something that went straight to the marrow. Archaeus felt his armor vibrate around him, like the custodian plate itself remembered a command older than its forging. The golden lattice along the walls flickered, not dimming but shifting, as if reorienting itself toward something only it could sense. Mara clutched the edge of the daze, her blind eyes rolling blankly for a moment before snapping into focus with a natural clarity. "He's fighting it," she whispered. "The Emperor. He's holding the fragment down, forcing it back into silence." "How do you know?" Archaeus asked, tightening his grip on his spear as if it could somehow defend them from abstract truths. "Because the fragment is pushing against his will. Harder than before." Her hands shook, fingers splaying as if she were feeling the air deform around them. "He severed it to protect us. He buried it to protect himself. But now it's remembering what it was supposed to become." The vault's floor rippled, actual stone shifting like fabric. Archaeus stepped in front of Mara instinctively, though he did not know if his armor or weapon meant anything here. He scanned the circular chamber, recognizing signs he had been trained never to ignore. Spatial distortion, cognitive bleed, the warping of light around non-existent mass. These were the hallmarks of a psychic event large enough to shatter mortal minds. But this wasn't warp energy. This was something internal, something that had been part of the Emperor once, something that wanted to wake. The shells lining the vault's circumference shimmered, projecting ghostly impressions that flared and vanished, old weapons that had never been forged, treaties never written, enemies never fought. The vault was showing them possibilities again, but not wild, chaotic ones like those in the sphere's memory. These were structured, ordered, chosen. Archaeus felt the hairs on his neck rise. "Mara," he said quietly, "what am I looking at?" She touched the floor gently, and her breath hitched. This is the part of him that decided what humanity would become. Not civilization, not empire, not war. Humanity. She looked up at Archaeus, her face pale with terror. "This is his design." The chamber responded to the words. The swirling projections synchronized, aligning into a giant, circular mosaic of shifting images that hovered above the daze. Thousands of scenes flickered, just beyond full resolution. Humans living without the warp. Humans shaped into a single-minded species. Humans rising in psychic unity. Humans extinguished before the first age of technology. Futures he had once considered. Futures he had rejected. Futures he had killed. Archaeus stared in horror as an image froze for a moment, showing an entire species of humanity bound together in a single, perfect psychic mind, their individuality erased in a radiance that looked at first like salvation, until the truth hit him like a hammer. They looked like the shadows from the memory sphere, not monsters, not demons. Humanity, perfected into something inhuman. Mara gasped. He feared this more than anything. Not chaos, not the warp. Us. What we could become if he allowed the wrong version of humanity to bloom. Archaeus felt the world tilt. The fragment is the part of him that chose which of these futures to kill, she finished. It's the part that held the knife. The mosaic shattered violently, scattering into shards of light that spiraled upward like dying stars. The vault shook. Mara cried out as another pulse surged through the chamber, this one so strong that even Archaeus staggered. The pulse didn't come from the vault. It came from above. From the throne. Archaeus steadied himself, heart pounding. Something is happening to him. Mara nodded weakly. Every time that fragment stirs, he must push it down again. But the strain. Custodian, he's breaking himself to keep it caged. The vault walls cracked, not from physical force. but from meaning like the chamber itself could no longer contain the implications unraveling inside it. A low, resonant vibration hummed through the unearthed stone, deep enough that Arceus felt it in his teeth. "Mara," he said, kneeling beside her. "What does the fragment want?" She lifted her face slowly. "To be whole again." Arceus froze. "And if it becomes whole?" Her answer was a whisper that shook him harder than any blade ever had. "He won't be the Emperor anymore." Silence settled, heavy and cold, the kind that suffocates. The vault suddenly dimmed, every line of golden light retracting at once, like veins collapsing. The chamber exhaled a final breath of psychic residue and went still. Arceus rose. "We leave now." Mara attempted to stand. Her knees buckled. He caught her, lifting her effortlessly. As they turned toward the door, Mara clutched his arm with sudden terror. "Arceus, wait," he halted. "I just felt something," she whispered. "Not from the fragments, from him." Arceus's blood chilled. "What did you feel?" Her blind eyes filled with dread, fear. The vault sealed behind them with a heavy, echoing finality, but the pulse followed them out, and far above, beneath the weight of 10,000 years, the golden throne trembled again. The approach to the Sanctum Imperialis felt different now. It was not the architecture, those titanic pillars of gold-veined marble, the ornamented arches carved with 10,000 years of triumph and grief, nor was it the vastness of the halls filled with petitioners and priests and hollow-eyed adepts who had forgotten what sleep felt like. No, the difference lay in the air itself. Arceus felt it before he saw it, a subtle distortion, the faintest pressure against the edges of his perception, like a shift in gravity too slight for mortals to notice, but unmistakable to a custodian. Something beneath the Emperor's presence had changed. As Arceus carried Mara through the gilded corridors, the crowds parted instinctively. Pilgrims fell to their knees. Tech priests froze, their mechadendrites curling inward like frightened insects. Vox officers silenced their comms mid-transmission, as though some primal instinct commanded them to stillness. Even the wall's vast slabs of sanctified metal and stone seemed to hum with the strain of an unseen force. Mara trembled in his arms. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows we saw it." Arceus's grip tightened. "The Emperor does not punish truth-seeking." "No," she said softly. "But he punishes truth that threatens humanity." Custodians did not flinch, but Arceus felt something constrict in his chest. They reached the outer gates of the throne sanctum, titanic adamantine slabs, guarded by 24 custodian wardens in mirrored armor. Their halberds gleamed in the dim golden glow. Arceus recognized several by name, warriors who had stood vigil longer than most planets had existed. Warden Captain Lysandro stepped forward. His face was a stone mask, but his eyes held something Arceus had never seen in a custodian. "And is Arceus Vallon," Lysandro said quietly. "The throne has been unstable." Arceus felt the word like a blade pressed to his spine. "Define unstable." Lysandros hesitated. "Another thing custodians did not do. Psychic bleed through from the Emperor. Rhythmic fluctuations in the Astronomican's harmonics. Choir serfs collapsing. Several astropaths have begun speaking in languages no lexicon can identify." Mara lifted her head. "They're not languages. They're possibilities." Lysandros blinked. "Who is this?" Arceus set Mara on her feet. She swayed but remained upright. "She's here by necessity," Arceus said. "By his will." Lysandros looked at Mara for a long moment, then stepped aside. The gates opened, and the Sanctum Imperialis greeted them with the weight of eternity. The golden throne dominated the chamber, an impossible machine of gold, brass, and bone, its components rising like organ pipes and descending like roots into the palace's foundations. The Emperor's skeletal form sat upon it, immobile, eternal, radiant. Lines of psychic force spiraled from him, connecting to the Astronomican in the void, binding humanity to the fragile thread of the warplanes. But something was different. His light no longer shone in steady gold. It shivered. Thin strands of cold, pale illumination threaded through the golden radiance, like cracks spidering through the surface of a star. Not silver, Not blue, something colder, something deeper, something uncomfortably like the light that had pulsed inside the Forbidden's memory. Mara inhaled sharply. He is losing his grip. Archaeus stepped closer, feeling the air thicken around him. Every instinct he possessed, every fragment of training burned into his gene-wrought bones, screamed caution. Not because the Emperor was dangerous, he always had been, and because the space around him had become fraught, strained, as though reality were being pulled into directions at once. Custodian Valeris stood at the dais, helm under his arm, face shadowed with grim calculation. He turned as Archaeus approached. "You felt it," Valeris said. It was not a question. "Yes," Archaeus replied. "And we saw what may be causing it." Valeris's eyes flicked to Mara, the astropath. "She's witness to something none of us were supposed to understand," Archaeus said. Valeris nodded slowly. "Then speak, quickly." Before Archaeus could answer, the throne pulsed. A wave of psychic force rolled outward, gentle enough not to crush, yet powerful enough to seize every mind in the chamber. Even the custodians froze, eyes wide, as the Emperor's radiance intensified. Gold became white gold. White gold became pale. Pale became cold. A whisper threaded through the air. Not words, not thought. Something between the two. Archaeus felt it in his spine. Mara felt it in her soul. Valeris staggered, catching himself with the haft of his spear. What was that? Mara's lips parted. She looked like someone trying to breathe underwater. "He's calling to it," she whispered. "The fragment, the part he severed. It's awake enough to answer." Archaeus's vision flickered as another pulse rippled outward. The custodians braced. Several servitors collapsed, smoke rising from their neural ports. The choir serfs in the lower pits screamed as one, their voices blending into a single harrowing note before fading into unconsciousness. The throne groaned a tortured, metallic sound that had not been heard since the Siege of Terra. Mara clutched her temples, tears streamed from her eyes. "He's trying to hold it down, but he can't. It remembers him too well." Valeris's jaw clenched. "We must stabilize the systems." "No," Mara rasped. "This isn't the machine. This is him." Archaeus stepped closer to the dais. "Mara, what do you see?" "Not see," she whispered. "Feel." She raised a trembling hand, pointing toward the Emperor's bowed head. The whisper beneath his light. "It's not trying to destroy him." Archaeus felt the chamber tighten around them. "It's trying to rejoin him." Golden radiance flickered again, faint, fragile. Mara sucked in a desperate breath. "And if it succeeds? The Emperor we know dies." A crack of pale light split. The air behind the throne thin at first, like a hairline fracture in the world. Then it widened, not physically. Psychicall. An invisible seam in the Emperor's soul had begun to open. And something on the other side was waking. Something that had been denied for 10,000 years. The seam widened, no sound, no light, no physical movement. Yet everyone in the Sanctum Imperialis felt it. A psychic pressure spread outward like a cold exhalation, brushing across skin and armor, then sinking deeper into thought, into memory, into the quiet corners of the self that even prayer could not reach. Custodians staggered, tech priests spasmed as their implants overloaded with signals beyond machine translation, and Mara, frail against the immensity of what stirred above her, fell to her knees with a strangled gasp. Archaeus caught her before she struck the stone, his arms wrapping around her as she trembled. "Stay with me," he muttered, though he was not sure she could hear him through the storm inside her head. Valeris barked orders that dissolved into echoes before they reached the walls. The palace's psychic dampeners, vast machines capable of muting even the riots of the warp, flickered, their rune lights stuttering like dying stars. The Emperor's aura was eclipsing every safeguard the Imperium had ever built. Mara's fingers clawed at Archaeus's gauntlet. "It's here," she whispered, "the fragment. It's touching him." Archaeus looked toward the golden throne. At first, he saw only brilliance. Gold, white, pale radiance swirling around a figure both dead and impossibly alive. But then he saw the difference, the thin fissures of cold illumination threading through the Emperor's light, shimmering like cracks in a glacier. The golden radiance resisted, surging and pulsing to hold its shape, but the pale threads grew, brighter, sliding between the cracks like water, forcing its way through stone. Valeris joined Arceus at the dais, his breath sharp. "This is not the Emperor's doing," he said. "This is intrusion." "No," Mara whispered. "This is reunion." Arceus felt something shift in the air, a subtle pulling sensation, as though gravity had changed direction. The Emperor's head, immobile for 10,000 years, tilted a fraction of a degree. Not enough to be certain, but enough to break Arceus's breath. A psychic shockwave swept outward. Mara screamed. The custodians fell to one knee. The choir serfs descended into wailing hysteria. Even Valeris paled. Arceus stood firm, but only barely. Inside the shockwave was a sound, not words, not music, not thought. A memory. Not his. Not Moral's. The Emperor's. A vast, cold landscape of warp-stained skies, shadows swirling. A man. No. Something wearing the shape of a man raising his hand to divide himself. Light severing from light. Identity splitting like a star shedding a part of its burning core. And then, sealed silence. Millennia of stillness. The weight of eternity without completion. Mara clutched Arceus's chest plate. He can't hold it anymore. The fragment is remembering him. And he's remembering it. Arceus swallowed hard. Will it harm him? No, she gasped. But when they touch, he won't be the Emperor we know. Another pulse, stronger. The pale illumination pulsed outward from the throne like ripples across still water. Golden light recoiled, then surged back, struggling like a creature wounded, but not yet defeated. Valeris gripped the haft of his weapon, grounding himself. There must be something we can do. Some ritual, some stabilizer. Summed a new voice rose behind them. No machine or litany can touch this. Arceus turned. It was Magos Prime Thane, his mechanical limbs twitching with agitation, optic lenses dilated. Sparks snapped from his mechadendrites as he limped closer. I have monitored the throne for millennia, Thane rasped. I have seen its fires gutter. I have witnessed its circuits bleed. But this is not malfunction. This is evolution. Mara stiffened. No, she whispered. This is remembrance. Another shockwave hit. This time, the Emperor's. Golden aura collapsed inward, for a moment, just a moment, revealing a silhouette outlined in pale radiance. Not brighter, not stronger. Different. A shape that did not fully align with the body on the throne. Arceus's stomach twisted. Mara, what am I seeing? She blinked through tears. The part he cut away is trying to become him again. But if it succeeds, the Emperor will be whole in a way we have never known. And I don't know if humanity can survive that truth. The pale fissure behind the throne widened, spiraling upward like a vortex of psychic wind. Golden light strained to seal it, but the effort tore new cracks across the Emperor's radiance. Threads of his aura wavered, like tattered banners in a storm. The choir serfs below suddenly fell silent. Arceus's breath froze. Silence from the Astronomican choir was not silence. It was absence. A fresh whisper threaded through the air, so soft it barely existed, but so immense Arceus felt it pass through every atom of his being. It did not come from the Emperor. It came from the scene behind him, a whisper of identity, of recognition, of reunion. Moroz's voice trembled. It's calling him by a name he hasn't heard in 10,000 years. Arceus stared at her. What name? She shook her head violently. No human tongue can speak it. It is the name he held before humanity existed. Then she lifted her tear-streaked face toward the throne. And he is answering. The pale fissure flared brighter, wider, hungrier. And in that blinding moment, Arceus understood. The Emperor was not losing a battle. He was losing a boundary. Humanity's God was being reminded of what he once was, and what he could become again. The fissure behind the golden throne widened with a slow, deliberate inevitability, not like something breaking, but like something unfolding, something long compressed finally stretching into its true shape. A pale radiance spilled through it, brighter than moonlight, yet colder than the void, casting warped shadows across the sanctum. Custodians braced, weapons trembling in hands, engineered never to tremble. Servitors spasmed, sparks bursting from their cranial ports. Even the great pillars seemed to bow, their carved saints shuddering under the pressure of a force older than the Imperium, older perhaps than the idea of gods themselves. Archaeus felt Mara's fingers tighten around his gauntlet. She stared upward, blind eyes somehow seeing more than any of them. Her lips parted in awe and terror. "He's remembering," she whispered. "The Emperor is remembering who he was before humanity existed." A chill ran through Archaeus, deeper than fear. Custodians were molded to endure the unimaginable, but nothing had trained him for the idea that the Emperor, his Emperor, had ever been anything else. They had no doctrine for this, no catechisms, no fallback truths. Valeris stepped forward, planting his spear into the stone floor as if anchoring himself. "Mara Selene," he said evenly, "explain." Now, her breath shivered in her chest. The fragment, the part he severed, was not just power, not just potential, it was identity. A version of himself he refused to become. A path he rejected before he ever wore mortal flesh. The fissure pulsed in answer, a soundless thrum that resonated through every skull in the chamber, like a hand pressed to bone. The Emperor's golden aura convulsed, collapsing inward before surging outward again with renewed force. It was the psychic equivalent of a man bracing himself against a rising tide. Thane's mechadendrites writhed. "This is impossible. The Emperor cannot change. The Emperor cannot be altered. He isn't changing," Mara said softly. "He's being reminded." The words seemed to dim the sanctum's light. All at once, the fissure snapped into perfect clarity. It no longer looked like a tear or a wound. It looked like a doorway, but not into another room. Not into the warp, not into any realm the Imperium had words for. It opened into a kind of unspace, an impossible horizon of shifting potential, where form was suggestion and time was irrelevant. And at its center, barely visible through the glare, stood a figure made of pale light. It was humanoid, but only barely. Limbs flickered between too many joints. Its outline shimmered like a reflection seen through boiling water. The face, if it had one, tilted toward the Emperor with unmistakable recognition. Archaeus's breath stopped. Valeris's spear dipped by a fraction. He forced it back upright, jaw gritted. Thane whispered a Binharic prayer that came out distorted and meaningless. Mara trembled. "That thing is not a demon, not a warp entity, not an echo. It is the Emperor's other self, the identity he cut away, the future he murdered before it was born." The pale figure moved forward one step. Reality buckled around its footfall, the air compressing, stone groaning as if the concept of weight had abruptly intensified. A cascade of golden sparks erupted from the Emperor's aura, each spark a fragment of psychic force burning. Away under the pressure of the fragment's presence, Archaeus took an involuntary step backward, not out of fear for himself, out of fear for him. The Emperor's light flared brilliant, defiant. For a heartbeat, the fragment's radiance dimmed, held at bay by the will of the man who had once defied gods, primarchs, and the warp itself. Then the fissure pulsed again, harder. The pale figure raised its hand, and the Emperor's golden aura cracked, not shattered, not destroyed. Cracked. A thin line of pale brilliance split the divine radiance, like a fault line running through a star. Mara screamed, dropping to the floor. Her voice echoed with something that did not belong to her. "It remembers being part of him. It remembers what he refused to become." Archaeus knelt beside her. "Mara, what does it want?" She gasped, shuddering. "Not vengeance, not destruction, completion." The word hit the chamber like a blow. Completion. The Emperor had severed this part of himself, sacrificed it, buried it, silenced it. But to the fragment, none of that mattered. It had never understood exile. It had only known absence. and now that it had awakened, it sought the only thing it had ever been meant to do: rejoin him. Valeris's eyes widened. If they merge, what happens to him? Mara shook her head violently. He will still exist, but not as the Emperor we know, not as the Emperor humanity needs. Archaeus looked toward the golden throne. The Emperor's skeletal form glowed with incandescent strain. Golden radiance fought the pale intrusion in frantic pulses. The air filled with the scent of ozone, burning incense, and something colder, something like crackstone on a raw winter night. The pale figure stepped closer. Another crack burst across the Emperor's aura. His light guttered. Mara whispered, "He's losing." Archaeus rose. Slowly. Deliberately. He tightened his grip on his spear. "He's not losing," he said quietly. "He's being overwhelmed." The fissure pulsed again. The pale figure reached out. And for the first time in 10,000 years the Emperor stirred. Not physically. Psychicall. Why? A tremor through reality. Ripple of wool. A whisper. Not yet. The pale figure hesitated. Barely. A fraction of a second. But a fraction of a second was all the Imperium had left. The hesitation was imperceptible. A pause with no breath inside it. A flicker in the radiance that lasted less than a heartbeat. But to Archaeus, to Mara, to every custodian in the Sanctum Imperialis who bore witness, that fraction of stillness felt like the galaxy caught between two futures. The pale figure, this impossible shard of what the Emperor had once been, or might have become, waited at the edge of the fissure, its hand raised, its form radiant and formless all at once. Like an idea trying to remember how to be flesh, the Emperor's whispered defiance still trembled in the air. Not sound, but intention pressed against reality. And the fragment answered. Not with words, not with movement, with recognition. A ripple of pale light surged outward, brushing against the Emperor's golden aura like a hand stroking a long-forgotten scar. The throne groaned. Circuits overloaded in showers of sparks. Choir serfs collapsed, bodies writhing as psychic pressure tore through their senses. Even the distant Astronomican flickered, a momentary dimming that might take navigators generations to understand. Mara clutched her chest and sobbed. It knows him, it remembers him, and it loves him. The word struck Archaeus harder than any weapon could. Love, he echoed, horrified. Yes, Mara breathed, trembling, because he was once whole, and it was a piece of that wholeness. The pale radiance intensified. More cracks spidered across the Emperor's golden light, not deep, but widening, spreading. Archaeus felt the change in the marrow of his bones. Valeris whispered, "If they merge fully, humanity loses the Emperor we know." Mara nodded. "He will ascend, descend, transform. There is no language for what he becomes, only that he will no longer be what holds humanity together." A new pulse surged through the room, powerful enough that Archaeus staggered, despite his enhanced physiology. The Emperor was fighting, but the fight was changing. The golden radiance no longer pressed outward, now it drew inward, condensing around him, a collapsing star. "He's trying to shield us," Mara cried. "He's taking the blow into himself, so it doesn't reach the warp. He's sacrificing stability for containment." Archaeus stared upward, awe and terror warring in his chest. The Emperor's immobile body unchanged for millennia seemed to dim, the faint glow in his empty sockets flickering. The pale figure stepped closer. Reality buckled. Something ancient awakened beneath the palace, an echo of the chamber where Archaeus and Mara had first glimpsed forbidden structures. A resonance trembled up through the mountain of stone and gold, matching the sensation filling the sanctum. All the pieces of the Emperor's hidden past were aligning, vibrating in unison. The fragment raised its hand again, and this time the Emperor did not resist. He shook. Mara shrieked. "He's breaking. He's breaking himself to stop it." Valeris dropped to one knee, overwhelmed. Thane screamed in static, mechadendrites thrashing wildly. Archaeus alone stood firm, but only because something deep within him, something forged not by gene master or artificer, but by purpose itself, refused to kneel. He stepped forward, each footfall echoing in the charged air as if challenging the immensity unfolding before him. Arceus, Mara gasped, reaching for him. You can't. He did not stop. He could not. If the custodies existed for anything, it was for this, not to guard the Emperor's body, but to guard his purpose, to stand between him and whatever sought to own him, even as the threat came from his own ancient shadow. Arceus planted his spear, golden tip blazing with refracted radiance from both Emperor and fragment. Pale and gold tangled together across the blade, flickering like dueling suns. The pale figure paused. Not in fear. In curiosity. It regarded Arceus, its form shifting in ways that defied senses. No face, no eyes, yet Arceus felt himself being seen in a way that stripped him bare, revealing every oath he had ever sworn, every memory he had ever held, every particle of faith that had ever defined him. And then a pulse through his mind. An invitation, a glimpse, a choice, for an instant to brief to measure. Arceus saw what the Emperor had cut away, a being not malevolent but limitless, not cruel but absolute, not a destroyer, but a sculptor of futures, too heavy for any mortal species to survive. A consciousness capable of shaping humanity into unity, so profound it would erase individuality, identity, and the flawed brilliance that made humans what they were. A god not of war, not of guardianship, but of inevitability. A god humanity was never meant to meet. Arceus staggered, breath stolen from him. The fragment's radiance swelled. He wants to become whole, Mara sobbed. He wants to rejoin. He doesn't understand why he was refused. The Emperor's golden aura surged violently, desperation bleeding into the radiance, like fire into water. A final whisper tore through the chamber. Stay separate. Not a command. A plea. The fragment hesitated again. Then, slowly, the pale hand lowered. Mara gasped. Valeris breathed. Thane collapsed. The fissure dimmed, but did not close. Instead, the fragment stepped backward, its form flickering like a candle fighting darkness. Mara whispered, "It's choosing to leave." Only because he asked. The pale shape shimmered, thinning, dissolving into mist-like light. And then it was gone. The fissure sealed with a breath-like sigh. The golden radiance around the Emperor collapsed inward, then stabilized, burning with fierce, fragile steadiness. The choir serfs inhaled as one. The air lightened. The walls stopped shaking. But the silence that followed was not peace. It was aftermath. Mara collapsed fully into Arceus's arms, sobbing with relief and grief tangled together. Valeris rose, slowly, leaning on his spear as though he had aged centuries. Thane staggered to his feet, mechanical limbs twitching with damaged feedback. Arceus looked to the Emperor. Still, silent, radiant. But he knew the truth. The Emperor had not won. The fragment had not lost. They had recognized one another and chosen separation only out of will, not strength. And that truth, if spoken, would devastate humanity more thoroughly than any demon could dream. Mara whispered hoarsely, "We can never tell them. Not the ecclesiarchy, not the high lords, not even the other custodians." Arceus nodded slowly. "No one must know." Valeris murmured, "Not now. Not ever." Arceus gazed at the throne, at the strain beneath the light, at the god who had held himself apart for humanity's sake. He whispered a private oath, one no custodian had spoken in 10,000 years. "We will guard this truth. As we guard him," Mara exhaled shakily, "and pray," she whispered, "that he never remembers again." The Emperor's radiance flickered softly, almost imperceptibly. As if he had heard. As if he agreed. As if he grieved. And the chamber fell silent. A silence holding the greatest forbidden revelation in human history. A silence that would outlive them all.